A man gave water to a dying alien woman. By morning, alien warrior women had surrounded his hut. Luke Carter lived alone on the edge of the desert. His small hut was built from metal scraps and old wood, with a few solar panels on the roof. He grew some vegetables in a small garden and collected rainwater in a barrel. Life was quiet and often lonely, but he liked it that way. The desert was harsh, but it offered freedom. He could walk for miles without seeing anyone. Sometimes he would hear distant wind echoes or the faint howl of desert creatures at night, but human voices were rare. One evening, as the sky turned red with sunset, Luke went out to check his water collector. He noticed something strange near the far edge of his property. A figure lay in the sand, half buried and moving very little. He squinted in the fading light. It was an alien. Luke had seen a few strange creatures in the desert, but nothing like this. The woman was humanoid but taller than a human, with smooth silver skin that shimmered under the last rays of sun. Her limbs were thin but strong, and her eyes were wide and dark. She breathed weakly, and her body was covered in scratches and burns. Luke's heart beat faster. He knew the desert could kill in minutes. He ran toward her, carrying a small water container. "Hey, can you hear me?" he said softly. She made a faint sound, but her eyes barely opened. Her lips moved in a strange way, forming sounds Luke could not understand. He knelt beside her. She was light, almost too light to be real. Luke poured a little water onto her lips. She drank slowly, shivering. The water seemed to revive her just a little. Her eyes opened wider for a moment, and she looked at him, not with fear, but with something he could not name. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition. Then she collapsed again. Luke looked around. The desert was quiet except for the wind. He lifted her carefully and carried her toward his hut. She was heavy for how light she felt. He kept her close, wrapped in an old blanket. When he reached the hut, he set her down gently on a cot. He cleaned her wounds with a cloth and water. Some scratches were deep. Some burns were red and raw. He knew he did not have medicine that could cure everything, but he did what he could. He glanced at the sky. Night was coming. The stars began to shine one by one. Luke sat beside her, listening to her soft breaths. She made low murmurs, almost like talking in her sleep. He did not understand, but the sounds were not angry or painful. He felt calm for some reason, as if she had brought a strange peace with her presence. His water supply was low. He had given her half of what he collected that day. He worried about tomorrow. But he could not let her die. He could not leave her outside in the cold desert night, so he stayed. He watched over her. He thought about how small and fragile life was. He thought about the choices people made, about helping others, about kindness. He realized that even in a harsh world, a single act could matter more than anything else. After a while, the alien woman stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, focusing on him. She tried to sit up but failed. Her voice was soft but strange. She said something Luke did not understand. The sound of her words was almost musical, flowing like water over rocks. He shook his head. "I don't understand, but it's okay. Just rest." She looked at him again, then closed her eyes. Luke noticed a small device on her wrist. It glowed faintly in the dark. He had never seen anything like it. It seemed to react to her heartbeat. He touched it gently. The light blinked once and then stopped. He did not know if it was important, but he did not want to break it. He walked to his small kitchen corner and heated some water. He poured it into a cup and drank slowly, thinking. He wondered where she came from. Was she alone? Did she belong to a tribe or a ship? Was she in trouble? He had no answers. The desert held many mysteries, but he had never seen anything like this. He returned to the cot and watched her sleep. He noticed scars on her shoulders, faint marks of old battles. She had fought before, and something told him she was strong, much stronger than she looked now. But right now, she was weak and needed help. He would protect her until she recovered, even if it meant risking himself. Outside, the wind blew cold, shaking the hut's walls. The stars shone brighter. Luke wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. He listened to the quiet sounds of the desert. In the distance, he heard the faint cry of a creature, maybe a fox or some desert animal. Everything seemed still except for the soft breathing of the alien woman. Hours passed. Luke tried to rest, but he could not sleep. He kept one eye open, one hand near her, ready if she needed more water. Every so often, she stirred, making small noises, then relaxed again. Luke thought about what would happen when she woke. Would she attack him? Would she run away? He shook his head. He hoped she would trust him. He hoped she would live. As the night deepened, he noticed her breathing changing. Slower now, steadier. The water had helped, but she was still fragile. He whispered quietly, "Just hold on, you'll be okay, I'll protect you." The words felt strange even to him, but he said them anyway. Time passed slowly. The desert night was long and cold. Luke kept checking the water he had left. Not much, maybe enough for another day if he rationed carefully. He knew he had made a choice. He had given water to a stranger, not knowing who she was or what might happen. But he felt it was right. Helping her was more important than worrying about what could go wrong. Finally, just before dawn, the alien woman moved more strongly. Her eyes opened, sharper now. She looked at Luke, and for the first time there was recognition in her gaze. She said something again, clearer this time. Luke still could not understand the words, but the tone was urgent. She tried to reach for something, her fingers brushing the blanket. Luke leaned closer. "It's okay, take it easy, you're safe here." She paused, then a small glowing symbol appeared above her wrist device. It flickered, casting a soft light across the room. Luke stared, confused. The symbol seemed like a signal, but he did not know what it meant. She closed her eyes again, exhausted. Luke stayed beside her until the first light of dawn appeared. Sunlight crept over the desert, turning the sand gold. Luke looked outside. The world was bright, and for a moment he felt hope. He had saved her through the night. Maybe, just maybe, things would be different now. He did not yet know that the simple act of giving water would change his life forever. He did not know that by morning he would no longer be alone in the desert, that others, powerful and strange, would come to his hut. All he knew was that the alien woman survived, and he had done what he could. As the sun rose higher, Luke carried her to a small chair by the window. He sat beside her, holding her hand gently. She looked at him with eyes full of questions and something like gratitude. The desert wind blew softly, and Luke felt a strange calm. The world outside the hut was harsh, dangerous, but inside, a small life had been saved, and that mattered more than anything. And for Luke Carter, the day had only just begun. The sun climbed higher over the desert, turning the sand into a bright, blinding gold. Luke Carter sat by the small window of his hut, watching the horizon. The alien woman, Sina, was still weak but awake now. She tried to sit up, her movements careful and slow. Luke helped her, keeping his hands steady under her arms. She looked around the hut, her dark eyes scanning every corner as if she were searching for something. "You're safe here," Luke said quietly. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you." Sina looked at him, her lips moving slightly, forming words Luke could not understand. She made a soft, humming sound like she was speaking a song. He shook his head. "I don't understand, but it's okay, you don't need to speak. Just rest." She closed her eyes, then opened them again, staring at the small garden outside. Luke noticed that her breathing was more steady now. The water he had given her last night had saved her life, but she was still fragile. He went to fetch some food he had prepared, simple bread and dried vegetables. Sina took a small bite, careful not to strain herself. Luke smiled. She was stronger than she looked, he could tell that, but the desert could take anyone quickly if they were not careful. While Sina ate, Luke thought about the device on her wrist. It had glowed faintly last night, then blinked off. He did not know what it was for, but somehow he felt it was important. He reached out to touch it gently, careful not to hurt her. The moment his fingers brushed it, a soft pulse of light spread across the device. Sina's eyes widened and she placed her hand over his, stopping him. "Okay," Luke said. "I won't touch it again." She nodded slightly, looking at him with an intensity that made him uneasy. There was something in her eyes, a message he could not read, but it felt urgent, serious. The desert was quiet for most of the morning. Luke went outside to check his water collector. The metal panels were warm under the sun, and the small barrel was almost full after last night's condensation. He frowned. The desert was too quiet. Sometimes the quiet meant nothing, but other times it was the calm before something dangerous. He shook his head. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe he had just lost sleep last night. He returned to the hut and found Sina sitting up more steadily. She held the wrist device and pressed it lightly. The device glowed again, brighter this time, sending tiny pulses of light across the room. Luke noticed that the light seemed to go beyond the hut into the desert. He stepped closer, curious and nervous. "What are you doing?" he asked. She looked at him and said something, again in her strange tongue. He shook his head. She sighed a soft, low sound and pressed the device again. Suddenly, a far-off sound came from the desert. It was faint, like the hum of a large engine or some kind of communications signal. Luke froze. "What is that?" he whispered. Sina's eyes darted toward the horizon. Her movements were faster now, more alert. She pointed to the desert beyond the small garden. Luke squinted and saw shadows moving in the distance. At first, he thought they were rocks or maybe animals, but then the shapes became clearer. They were humanoid, taller than humans, moving in a purposeful way. Luke's heart pounded. He ran to the door and looked out. Several figures were approaching his hut. They were not human. They wore heavy armor that reflected the sunlight, and each one carried weapons unlike anything Luke had ever seen. Their steps were measured, disciplined, and slow, but there was power in their movement. Sina's eyes were wide with fear and recognition at the same time. She stood slowly, her small movements careful but precise. She spoke quickly in her own language, her tone sharp and commanding. Luke could not understand the words, but the energy in her voice told him that whatever was coming was serious. "Stay calm," he said. He did not know if they would understand him, but he tried. He walked closer to Sina, keeping a hand near her shoulder. She nodded slightly, then went to the door herself, holding the wrist device in her hand. She pressed it again, and a symbol of light shot outward, almost like a signal flare, but silent. The figures in the desert stopped for a moment. Then slowly they advanced again. Luke counted them. There were at least 10, maybe more. They moved in formation, circling slightly as if they were preparing for something. Luke felt a surge of fear, but he did not want Sina to notice. He had helped her survive once. He could not let her see him panic. Sina turned to him, pointing outside and then back at herself. Luke understood. She was calling them, explaining that he had helped her. He swallowed hard, realizing what this might mean. These were her people. She had been injured, lost, and alone. His small act of kindness had alerted her clan, and now they were coming to see what had happened. The first warrior reached the edge of the garden. She was tall, with silver armor that matched Sina's skin tone in color. She raised her hand, holding a weapon, but she did not attack. Instead, she spoke in a language Luke could not understand. Sina answered immediately, the words flowing quickly and clearly. The warrior lowered her weapon slightly. The desert seemed quieter now, as if holding its breath. More figures approached, surrounding the hut from all sides. Luke felt trapped, but he kept his hands raised slightly, showing he meant no harm. The warrior's eyes were sharp, observing everything. They circled the hut, their armor clinking softly with every movement. Luke noticed their strength and discipline. Even if they wanted to, they could destroy his hut in minutes. Sina stepped forward, placing a hand on Luke's chest. She pressed lightly, then gestured to the warriors. Luke understood the gesture. She was telling them he was the one who had given her water, who had saved her life. She was explaining, without words he could understand, that he was not a threat. The lead warrior, taller and stronger than the others, stepped forward. Her armor had a crest on the chest, a symbol of rank. She spoke to Sina, who answered immediately. Luke watched, nervous but curious. The warrior turned to him, and though he could not understand the words, the gestures were clear. They were cautious but not hostile. They were observing him, trying to understand who he was and why he was with Sina. Luke realized that his simple act of kindness had changed everything. He had given water to a dying stranger, and now he was surrounded by powerful warriors. The desert could have killed him any other night, but tonight he had saved a life. And in return, he was being judged, tested, but not punished. He stepped forward slowly, showing his hands and bowing slightly. Sina's eyes shone with pride. She spoke to the warriors again, and they relaxed slightly, though their weapons did not lower completely. Luke felt a mix of fear and awe. He was looking at beings far stronger than himself, beings who could have destroyed him without a second thought. Yet they were choosing not to. The warriors moved closer to the hut, inspecting it carefully. They looked at the garden, the water collector, and even the small cot where Sina had rested. Luke explained, in broken gestures and simple words, that he had found Sina injured in the desert and given her water. He pointed to the device on her wrist, hoping it would communicate somehow. One warrior tilted her head, observing carefully. Sina placed a hand on the device and the light pulsed again. The warriors stepped back slightly, their posture changing. Luke realized that the light from the device must be a signal of trust or recognition. He did not know exactly what it meant, but it worked. The leader spoke again in harsh tones, pointing to Luke and then to Sina. Luke nodded, understanding. He had saved her and she had vouched for him. The desert, which had always been lonely and dangerous, had brought him into a connection he could never have imagined. Sina spoke again, her voice softer now. She gestured toward the warriors, then back at Luke, as if introducing him. Luke felt a strange pride and fear at the same time. He had acted out of simple kindness, yet now the galaxy, or at least a small part of it, was paying attention. The warriors began to settle around the hut. Some inspected the perimeter, others moved closer to Sina. Luke watched, still cautious but calmer now. He could see that Sina's wounds were healing slightly faster, perhaps because she felt safe among her own. He felt relief, knowing he had helped more than one life by staying with her. As the sun rose higher, the desert wind blew softly. Luke looked out over the sand, realizing that this day would change his life forever. The warriors would stay, and he would have to learn their ways, at least enough to survive. He had stepped into something far bigger than the desert, bigger than his quiet life. And he knew, without words, that the simple act of giving water had created a bond that could not be broken. The alien warriors had come, not to attack, but to see the man who had helped their sister survive. Luke Carter was no longer alone in the desert. His life, simple and quiet before, was now tied to something powerful, something vast, and something he could never have imagined. The desert continued to shine under the morning sun, and Luke sat beside Sina, watching the warriors move around. He felt a strange calm. He had survived the night, saved a life, and now he was part of a story far greater than himself. The day was just beginning, and he knew that by nightfall, nothing would ever be the same again. The sun was high in the sky, and the desert sand glowed under its heat. Luke Carter watched from his small hut as the alien warriors moved carefully around his property. They were strong, disciplined, and alert. Some were checking the perimeter, others looked at the garden and the water collector. Luke felt a mix of fear and awe. These beings were far stronger than any human he had ever met, yet they had not attacked him. Instead, they were observing, judging, learning. Sina sat beside him on the cot, recovering slowly. Her eyes were sharp now, scanning everything, alert to every movement. She touched her wrist device lightly, and it pulsed with soft light. Luke noticed the glow and realized it must communicate with the warriors outside. It was a link, a bond, something he could not understand, but he could feel its power. One of the warriors stepped forward. She was taller than the rest, her armor shining in the sun. She carried a long, staff-like weapon. Her movements were careful, precise. Luke could see the respect in her eyes as she looked at Sina and then at him. She spoke quickly in her own language. Sina answered immediately, her voice flowing with confidence and command. Luke did not understand a word, but he could tell from the tone that they were discussing him. Luke swallowed hard. He had given water to Sina last night, not knowing who she was. Now that simple act of kindness had drawn the attention of an entire group of powerful alien warriors. His heart pounded. What if they judged him wrongly? What if they decided he was a threat? He had no weapons, no defenses. All he had was his honesty and his courage to help a stranger. The lead warrior stepped closer. She tilted her head, examining him carefully. Luke noticed her armor had marks and symbols, signs of rank or achievements he could not read. Her eyes held a question. Why had a human risked so much for an alien? Luke met her gaze and said simply, "I gave her water. She needed it." He did not know if she understood, but he said it anyway. The warrior's expression did not change immediately. She looked at Sina, who nodded slightly. Then slowly the warrior's shoulders relaxed. She gestured toward Luke, then pointed at the hut and back at herself. Luke realized she was asking for confirmation. Sina placed a hand over his chest lightly, then nodded. The warrior lowered her weapon completely. The tension in the air eased slightly. Luke breathed a little easier. He had survived the night, and now the warriors were seeing that his intentions were good. He realized something important. In this universe, even the smallest acts of kindness could have consequences far greater than he could imagine. By giving water, he had earned attention and now respect from beings far more powerful than himself. One of the younger warriors moved closer, her steps cautious. She looked at the small garden and the water collector. Luke smiled nervously. "I grow my own food," he said simply. She made a sound, a soft hum, and looked back at Sina. Sina nodded, explaining something. The young warrior tilted her head, then touched the water collector lightly. The device on Sina's wrist glowed faintly in response. Luke realized the warriors were checking to see if his home was safe, if he was prepared, if he could survive in the desert. Hours passed. The warriors stayed, some outside patrolling the area, some standing closer to the hut, always alert. Luke tried to continue his normal routine. He checked his garden, tended to a few plants, and made small preparations for food and water. Sina helped where she could, though she was still weak. She moved carefully, her grace and strength visible even in her injured state. At one point, a low sound came from the desert. Luke froze. He looked toward the horizon and saw a group of figures moving quickly in the distance. These were different from the warriors surrounding his hut. They were armed, rough, and aggressive. Luke felt fear grip him. The desert had many dangers, and now he understood that not all aliens were friendly. Sina noticed his fear immediately. She touched his arm, then gestured toward the approaching figures. Her eyes were hard, serious. She pressed the device on her wrist, sending a pulse of light outward. Instantly, the surrounding warriors adjusted their positions, moving into defensive formations. Luke watched, amazed at their discipline. They were ready for battle, protecting him without question, without hesitation. The lead warrior, the one who had judged him first, stepped forward. She raised her staff, then lowered it slowly. Luke could see the meaning in her gestures. They would defend him no matter what. He realized how much trust and honor mattered in this culture. By giving water to Sina, he had unknowingly become part of their world, bound by rules he could not read but could feel. The aggressive group drew closer. Luke could see their weapons now, jagged, unfamiliar, deadly. They were clearly looking for trouble, expecting an easy target. But the alien warriors surrounding his hut did not move to attack first. They waited, patient, disciplined, watching the desert carefully. Sina stood beside Luke, holding his hand lightly, showing him he was not alone. Luke felt a surge of courage. He had acted with kindness, and now he saw that even in a harsh universe, courage and compassion could create bonds strong enough to protect him. He realized that he was learning something important about honor, about trust, about life itself. The desert wind shifted, blowing sand across the dunes. The aggressive aliens stopped momentarily, as if sensing something they did not understand. The warriors' formation shifted slightly, and Luke noticed the difference immediately. They moved like one being, each aware of the others, ready to react instantly. The desert had become a stage, and he was at the center of a story far bigger than himself. Sina whispered something in her language. Luke did not understand the words, but the tone was urgent. He nodded, gripping her hand. The lead warrior stepped forward again, raising a hand to signal the others. Then, with careful precision, they began moving toward the approaching group, weapons ready but not aggressive. They were sending a warning, showing strength without unnecessary violence. The aggressive aliens hesitated. They could see the power of the warriors surrounding the hut. They could see discipline, training, and strength far beyond their expectations. Luke realized that the desert, which had seemed empty and silent before, was now alive with purpose, with tension, with rules he could not fully understand but could feel in every heartbeat. Hours passed in this quiet standoff. Luke stayed beside Sina, holding her hand, speaking softly to keep her calm. She nodded, her eyes sharp and alive now. She was healing, gaining strength, and she was showing him that he was safe. The warriors patrolled, signaling to each other silently. Luke watched, amazed by their discipline and the way they worked as one. Finally, the aggressive group retreated, moving back toward the horizon. Luke could see their weapons lowered slightly, their confidence shaken. The warriors surrounding the hut relaxed, but not completely. They remained alert, always ready. Sina pressed her device once more, sending a faint pulse. The warrior's eyes shifted toward her, acknowledging the signal, recognizing her authority and the bond she had created with him. Luke realized something he had never understood before. A single act of kindness, a simple choice to give water to a dying stranger, had created a ripple far beyond his imagination. He had survived the desert night, earned the respect of powerful warriors, and now even deterred hostile aliens from approaching. The universe, harsh and dangerous, had acknowledged his courage. The lead warrior approached Luke. She gestured for him to follow her outside the hut. Luke obeyed cautiously. She spoke in her language, and Sina translated softly. They were telling him that by saving Sina, he had entered into a bond of honor. This bond was strong and could not be broken. It meant protection, respect, and responsibility. Luke nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what he had done. The sun began to set over the desert. Luke and Sina stood with the warriors surrounding them. The light of the setting sun reflected off the armor, casting long shadows across the sand. Luke felt a mix of fear, awe, and gratitude. He had acted with a simple human kindness, and now he was part of something far larger than himself. He was part of a story of honor, trust, and courage in a universe he had barely understood. That night, as the stars appeared, Luke sat outside with Sina. The warriors formed a quiet perimeter around the hut, patrolling silently. Luke looked at the desert, realizing that this world, which had seemed empty and harsh, was now filled with life, purpose, and unseen connections. He understood in a deep, simple way that kindness mattered. It could change fates, create bonds, and even protect a human against forces far stronger than himself. He held Sina's hand and whispered quietly, "We made it through today. I don't know what comes next, but we'll face it together." Sina looked at him, her dark eyes full of recognition and something like respect. The desert wind blew softly, carrying the scent of sand and distant life. Luke felt calm for the first time in a long while, knowing that by giving water he had changed everything, and that the warriors would keep their watch and keep him safe, for as long as he honored the bond he had created. The night stretched on, quiet and alive with purpose. Luke knew the desert was harsh, and the universe could be dangerous, but he had learned something important. One simple act of kindness could change everything. And in this vast, strange world, he had become part of a story far bigger than himself, one that was just beginning to unfold the next morning. The desert sun rose slowly, painting the sand in soft gold and pink. Luke Carter woke to the quiet sounds of the warriors moving outside his hut. He looked out the small window and saw Sina standing among them, her armor now polished and clean, her movements strong and precise. She was already awake, observing the desert, alert to every sound and motion. Luke rubbed his eyes and tried to steady his thoughts. He had survived last night, but he knew today would be different. The lead warrior, the one who had first judged him, approached the hut. She gestured for Luke to come outside. Luke hesitated for a moment, then stepped carefully into the sunlight. The desert was bright, harsh, and alive with movement. The warriors stood in formation around the hut, silent but watchful. Luke felt a wave of nervousness. These were powerful beings, and they could have destroyed him any time, yet here they were, giving him a chance. Sina stepped beside him and placed her hand lightly on his arm. She spoke softly in her language. Luke did not understand the words, but the tone was clear. "Trust them, they are your allies now." He nodded, and the lead warrior motioned for him to follow. They walked together toward a small clearing a short distance from the hut. Other warriors had gathered there, forming a circle. Luke realized he was being introduced to their customs. The lead warrior began moving her hands in precise gestures. Sina translated slowly. "You saved her life," she said. "By giving water, you have honored our clan. This honor cannot be ignored. You are now under our protection." Luke felt a mix of pride and fear. Protection from them was powerful, but it also meant responsibility. He had entered their world, and it was not a world he could leave easily. The warriors began showing Luke their ways. They demonstrated how to move silently across the desert, how to read the wind and sand for danger, and how to use their weapons safely. Luke tried to copy their movements, feeling awkward and clumsy. Sina corrected him gently, showing him how to hold the staff properly and how to step without disturbing the sand too much. Each motion was precise, disciplined, and strange to him, but he listened carefully. Hours passed. Luke trained under their watchful eyes. He stumbled often, his muscles aching from the unfamiliar motions, but he kept going. He realized that survival in this desert, especially with the warriors around, was about more than strength. It was about patience, observation, and respect. He began to understand a little of their discipline and why they were so formidable. Sina showed him how to communicate with them through small gestures and the wrist device. Luke pressed it gently, and it pulsed with soft light. The warriors around him reacted instantly, acknowledging him, recognizing him as part of their circle. Luke felt a strange pride. He had never been part of anything so disciplined, so powerful, and it was because he had made a simple choice, to give water. Later in the day, a warning came from the desert. Sina's device pulsed rapidly, sending a signal that made the warriors shift into formation. Luke followed her and the lead warrior, trying to keep pace. He saw a group of hostile aliens approaching. They were rough, armed, and clearly expecting an easy fight. Luke's heart pounded, but he remembered what Sina had taught him. Watch, listen, move with purpose, and do not panic. The warriors arranged themselves between the hostile aliens and the hut. They did not attack immediately. They waited, observing, communicating silently with gestures and small signals. Luke realized the difference between them and the raiders. The warriors were disciplined, confident, and aware of every motion. The raiders, by contrast, were aggressive, loud, and overconfident. Cena turned to Luke and gestured for him to stay behind the formation. He obeyed, staying close to the hut, watching carefully. The lead warrior stepped forward slightly, raising her staff. The raiders hesitated, seeing the confidence and discipline of the warriors. Luke felt a mixture of fear and awe. He had never seen such a display of strength, coordination, and control. Suddenly, one of the raiders lunged forward. The warriors reacted instantly. One moved to block, another moved to the side, and the leader used the staff to deflect the attack without striking fatally. Luke watched, heart pounding. The display was precise, powerful, and terrifying. The raiders had expected an easy fight, but the warriors were trained, disciplined, and untouchable when they moved together. The battle lasted only a few minutes. The raiders, realizing they were outmatched, retreated back into the desert. The warriors followed for a short distance, ensuring the enemies did not return, then came back to the hut. Luke breathed deeply, feeling relief and excitement. He had survived the tension, watched discipline and strength in action, and learned more about the warriors and their code of honor than any book could teach him. Cena turned to him after the skirmish. She placed her hand on his shoulder, then on his chest, a gesture that spoke without words. Luke understood. He had witnessed their power, and now he was part of their story. She gestured to the desert, then back at him, explaining that the warriors were now his protectors, and he had a place among them. Luke felt a mixture of awe and responsibility. He had given water, and that simple act had brought him to this moment. The rest of the afternoon was spent preparing the hut and its surroundings. The warriors helped strengthen the small shelter, digging shallow trenches, and setting up simple defenses. Luke learned to place rocks and sand strategically to make simple barriers that could slow down enemies. He worked alongside the warriors, copying their movements, and they watched him, correcting small mistakes with patience. Cena explained more of their laws. In their culture, helping a dying being was the highest honor. By saving her life, Luke had entered into a bond that required respect, honesty, and courage. The warriors now viewed him as a trusted friend, someone whose actions had proven his worth. Luke listened carefully, absorbing every detail. He realized that he had become part of a story larger than himself, a story of honor and courage that crossed species and worlds. As the sun began to set, the desert turned orange and red. Luke stood beside Cena, watching the horizon. The warriors formed a perimeter around the hut, patrolling silently, alert to any danger. Luke felt a strange calm. He had survived the day, learned their ways, and seen their power firsthand. He knew the desert was still dangerous, but he also knew he was not alone. That night, as the stars filled the sky, Luke sat outside with Cena and a few of the warriors. They were quiet, communicating through gestures and the pulses of the wrist devices. Luke watched the desert, realizing that he had entered a world of strength, discipline, and honor far beyond anything he had known. He spoke softly to Cena. "I don't know if I can do all of this, but I will try." Cena nodded, her dark eyes shining with understanding. She gestured to the warriors, showing him that they accepted him. Luke felt a warmth in his chest, knowing that one simple act of kindness, giving water, had created trust, protection, and respect in a universe he had never imagined. The desert night was calm, but alive with unseen forces. Luke understood that the warriors would stay, guarding him, training him, and preparing him for what could come. He had entered a bond he could not break, a bond that required courage, honesty, and kindness. And for the first time, he realized that in this harsh universe, a single act of compassion could create connections stronger than fear or power. Luke sat quietly, holding Cena's hand, watching the stars. He had survived the dangers of the desert, earned the respect of powerful warriors, and learned lessons that could not be taught in books. His life had changed forever, and he knew that tomorrow would bring more challenges, more lessons, and perhaps more battles. But he also knew that he had allies, and that even in a harsh universe, kindness and courage could shape destiny. The night deepened. The desert was silent except for the wind and the soft movement of the warriors. Luke felt a strange peace. He had acted with simple humanity, and that had led him to survival, trust, and honor. He understood now that he was no longer alone. The desert, once lonely and dangerous, was filled with life, purpose, and connections he could never have imagined. And as he looked at Cena and the warriors around him, Luke Carter realized that one small choice, giving water to a dying alien woman, had changed his life forever, and that the desert, with all its harshness, was now a place of protection, honor, and new beginnings the next. Morning, Luke Carter woke to the soft glow of the desert sun. The sand stretched endlessly, shining gold under the light. The hut had been reinforced overnight, and the warriors stood alert around it, scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. Luke felt the weight of the past days, but he also felt a quiet confidence. He had learned much from Sina and her people, and he was ready for whatever might come. Sina stood beside him, her movements calm and precise. She had recovered almost fully from her injuries. Her eyes, dark and sharp, scanned the desert. She placed a hand on Luke's shoulder and gestured toward the horizon. Luke followed her gaze and saw movement, distant figures approaching. This time the group was larger, more organized, and clearly dangerous. They carried weapons that glinted in the sunlight, and their steps were purposeful. Luke felt a surge of fear, but he did not show it. He had learned from the warriors how to remain calm, how to observe before acting. He adjusted his stance, hands ready, and watched carefully. The warriors around him moved into position, forming a circle around the hut. Their eyes were sharp, their movements precise. Luke realized he was witnessing a show of discipline and coordination unlike anything he had ever seen. Sina pressed the device on her wrist, sending a pulse of light that rippled outward. The warriors responded immediately, adjusting their positions, communicating silently with gestures and small signals. Luke felt a sense of unity. He was no longer alone. The warriors were his allies, and they would fight to protect him. The approaching group slowed as they neared the perimeter. They had expected an easy target, but the disciplined formation of the warriors stopped them in their tracks. Luke watched as the lead warrior, the one who had first judged him, raised her staff and gestured sharply. The signal was clear. They would not attack unless provoked, but they were ready to defend with full strength. Sina stepped forward, standing slightly in front of Luke. She spoke in her language, and Luke could see the effect immediately. The approaching group hesitated, confused by the authority and power in her tone. She gestured toward Luke, then back at the warriors, explaining, without words, that he was under their protection and that attacking him would bring their wrath. The raiders tried to advance, but the warriors moved as one. One warrior leapt forward, blocking a charge, while another swept to the side, cutting off an approach. The lead warrior used her staff to strike defensively, pushing one enemy back without killing them. Luke watched, heart pounding. The display of coordination, skill, and strength was breathtaking. These were not ordinary fighters. They were a force of nature, disciplined and deadly. Luke felt a hand on his shoulder. Sina was beside him, her dark eyes steady and focused. She whispered a few words, and Luke understood. Stay calm, watch, learn, act if needed. He nodded, gripping a small staff he had been training with. It was awkward in his hands, but he held it firmly. He knew his role was small, but he had a part to play. The raiders lunged again, more aggressively this time. The warriors responded instantly, blocking, deflecting, and guiding the attackers back. Luke stepped forward cautiously, swinging the staff in a defensive arc. He managed to block a strike aimed at Sina. The moment surprised him, and he realized he could act, could protect if needed. His small movements, combined with the warriors' skill, helped keep the attackers at bay. The battle lasted only a short while. The raiders, realizing they were outmatched and disciplined enemies surrounded by power and skill, began to retreat. The warriors did not pursue far, but their posture and readiness ensured the raiders would not return easily. Luke watched, amazed by their control and efficiency. He had witnessed a force unlike anything in the human world, yet he had been part of it, contributing in his small way. After the battle, the warriors regrouped around the hut. Sina turned to Luke, her dark eyes full of pride and understanding. She gestured to him, showing him that he had proven himself. The bond he had created by giving her water had grown stronger. It was not only trust, but respect. He had learned the laws of honor, courage, and responsibility in a harsh universe. He had survived, acted, and earned a place among the warriors. The lead warrior stepped forward, addressing Luke in gestures and tones that Sina translated. She explained that he was now recognized as part of their circle, a water brother, one whose actions had demonstrated honor and courage. Luke felt a strange warmth in his chest. He had never imagined that a simple act of kindness could lead to such recognition and responsibility. Sina guided him through the rituals that followed. They were simple but meaningful, gestures of respect, signals of trust, and acknowledgments of his courage. Luke followed carefully, absorbing every movement and understanding the depth of their culture. He realized that the desert, once harsh and lonely, was now a place of connection, respect, and strength. The rest of the day was spent tending the hut and its surroundings. Luke worked alongside the warriors, reinforcing walls, checking water supplies, and preparing food. Sina instructed him in small ways, teaching him to observe the desert, to recognize dangers before they appeared, and to move with awareness and caution. Each lesson was a gift, a piece of knowledge that could save his life and deepen his bond with the warriors. As the sun began to set, Luke stood outside with Sina and the warriors. The desert turned orange and red, the sand glowing under the dying light. The warriors formed a perimeter, silent and vigilant. Luke felt calm, yet alert. He had learned much, survived challenges, and earned the respect of beings far stronger than himself. He realized that kindness, courage, and observation could create bonds stronger than fear. Sina placed a hand on his shoulder, then gestured toward the horizon. Luke followed her gaze. In the distance, he saw movement, small but purposeful. It was another group, not yet hostile but curious. He understood immediately that the desert was alive with watchers, and that his life had become part of a larger story, one that stretched beyond the sand and the hut. He turned to the lead warrior, who nodded slightly. The gesture was simple but full of meaning. "You are ready." Luke felt pride mixed with humility. He had entered a world far beyond his understanding, survived, learned, and now had a place in it. He looked at Sina, who smiled faintly, her dark eyes full of warmth and respect. She had trusted him, and he had honored that trust. Night fell over the desert. Stars filled the sky, bright and countless. Luke sat outside the hut, beside Sina, watching the warriors patrol. The desert was quiet but alive with unseen forces. He realized that one simple act of giving water had changed everything. He had survived, learned, fought, and earned respect. He was no longer alone. Luke whispered softly, "We did it. We made it through." Sina nodded, her hand resting gently on his. She gestured to the warriors, showing him that they were now his allies, protectors, and friends. Luke felt a deep sense of belonging he had never known. The desert, once lonely and dangerous, had become a place of honor, courage, and connection. The warriors returned to the hut, settling for the night in their quiet, disciplined way. Luke and Sina sat together, speaking softly and sharing a simple meal. He reflected on the past days, the night he found her, the danger, the training, the battles. Every step had taught him something valuable. Kindness could create bonds, courage could protect, and respect could change fates. As the desert wind blew softly through the dunes, Luke felt a sense of peace. He had entered a story far greater than himself, one that would continue as long as he honored the bonds he had made. He had survived, learned, and grown, and he knew that the universe, harsh and vast, had recognized his courage and humanity. The night stretched on, quiet and full of purpose. Luke Carter held Sina's hand and looked at the stars. He knew that his life had changed forever. The simple act of giving water to a dying alien woman had brought him allies, protection, honor, and a place in a story far larger than himself. The desert, once a lonely and dangerous place, had become a home filled with connection, respect, and hope. And in that moment, Luke realized that he would never be the same. The universe was vast and harsh, but he had learned its most important lesson. Even a small act of kindness could change everything. He had survived, earned respect, and found a place among warriors who were stronger, wiser, and more honorable than he had ever imagined. The stars shone above the desert, and Luke Carter knew that he was ready for whatever came next, because he had learned to act with courage, kindness, and honor, and those qualities would guide him through any challenge the universe could send.